This module, we are going to discuss visual literacy and the implications that visual literacy has for our students and the way we teach our content. Visual literacy is growing in its importance because of our reliance on digital technologies to teach, interact with our students, and communicate with our students. So let's jump in and find out more. In this module, we're going to identify text sources that are defined as visual literacy, that are specific in certain domains and then across multiple domains. We're going to justify why visual literacy skills are essential to instructional methods to support students' critical thinking. And we're going to examine visual literacy comprehension methods to determine their usefulness within and across domains. Our essential question this week is, how can teachers help students interpret and make meaning from visual texts in ways that help them navigate academic contexts as well as general life? So this would be an opportunity that if we were in a face-to-face setting, we could complete this think, pair, share activity. If you are in an online setting, this is something that you can simply do yourself, but I wanted to share it with you because it's an easy way to implement discussion techniques into your lesson. So a think, pair, share is a structured discussion technique that's really easy to implement on the fly. You don't have to change desks around. It's not essential that students are, strategically paired. So it's something really easy to implement. And essentially what we would want to do is give time for individuals to think about a question or a problem. Sometimes the thinking actually requires them to write things down or to, put something in some sort of discussion box if it's an online format. And then the next thing would be that you would pair them. And so this is where you would say, okay, you're going to turn to a partner, you're going to turn to a shoulder partner, a desk partner, and you would ideally 20 to 30 seconds for one question is typically enough time. So 20 to 30 seconds per person. So that would roughly be about a minute, and you put a minute timer on. And then at that point, you give them time to share. So this is where you would go around the room, you would be listening to those conversations, gaining assessment data, that formative data that you can then use to guide the class forward. This is where you can tell where you might need to clarify something, need to revisit a concept, and then it allows you to have an opportunity to share out in a structured way. So then depending on how much time you have, you could either call on, 2 or 3 groups to share out their ideas about this, or you could have every single pairing, would be able to share. Depends on how much time you have. So for this particular one, if you're in an online format, you'll be considering individually, and if you're in a face-to-face format, you will actually be doing this with a partner or a group of 3. So we're going to watch a video, which I'm going to stop this. I'm going to ask that you stop this PowerPoint and go to Moodle. And I've actually put the link here for you in Moodle so that you can watch the video. It's very brief, about 3 minutes. And these are the questions that I want you to consider. What is visual literacy? Why are visual literacy skills important for academics and for life skills? And why is this an equity issue? So once again, when we're thinking about ensuring that all students have equal access to building competencies, building literacy acquisition skills, building their ability to critically think about literacy, why is this an equity issue? So please pause this, go watch the video, and then pick up with the narration. So now that you've had time to really consider what visual literacy is and why it is an equity issue, for the same reason that literacy is an equity issue when we talk about traditional print text. If our students are not able to understand what they're being bombarded with through visual medium day in and day out, if we're not giving them the skills to recognize bias, to understand some particular marketing or manipulation techniques, and to really interpret and create their own visual text to be able to communicate, then we are limiting their access to engage with the world. So we really want to dig into the definition of visual literacy that was first introduced in 1969 by John Debs, the founder of the International Visual Literacy Association. So I'm going to read this aloud. You can follow along, and I want you to really think about the layers that are present within this definition. Visual literacy refers to a group of vision competencies a human being can develop by seeing and at the same time having and integrating other sensory experiences. The development of these competencies is fundamental to normal human learning. When developed, they enable a visually literate person to discriminate and interpret the visible actions, objects, symbols, natural or man-made, that he encounters in his environment. Through the creative use of these competencies, he is able to communicate with others. Through the appreciative use of these competencies, he is able to comprehend and enjoy the masterworks of visual communication. So this definition kind of breaks down those layers. Notice that discrimination and interpretation are part of these competencies. So when we talk about discriminate here, we're talking about being very discerning about determining bias, determining where a source comes from, what the origins are, putting it in context with what's going on in the world at the time that it was created and what that perhaps means for present time and even future time. And then interpreting those actions, objects, and symbols. Also notice that there could be a creative use that allows the individual to communicate. And there can also be an appreciative use, which helps the learner comprehend and enjoy different visual literacies. So visual literacy is critical. It's a very, very important part of our world today. Probably, of course, it's always been important, but now more than ever because of our access to the virtual world. So essentially, visual literacy is the ability to read, write, and create visual images. It relates to art and design, but it also has a much wider application than simply art and design. It's about language, communication, and interaction, and it is a linguistic tool with which we communicate, exchange ideas, and navigate our complex world. So this first activity is going to be a montage, a visual literacy montage. I want you to methodically move through the next 10 slides to see a variety of types of visual literacy that secondary students encounter. As you're moving through them, for each one, I want you to consider what subject would students see this in? So what content area would they see this in? What strategies would they use to interpret it? So think about how they would derive meaning from this. How is this visual useful in teaching a concept or skill in this content area? And then lastly, how does this visual enable students to use critical thinking skills? So these are some things that you want to consider as you move through the montage. So let's dig even deeper into this definition of what is visual literacy to refine our understanding. Reading comprehension involves much more than just reading words in traditional text format. And we've been talking about that all semester. When we talk about visual literacy, as you can see from the montage, we mean photographs, cartoons, charts, pictograms, many types of graphics that relay ideas. Visual text gives a great deal of information in a smaller space than it would take to write the ideas in the form of words. They are considered highly concentrated forms of messaging. And when we think about visuals, we often assume that they're going to be easier for our students to understand, that comprehension is going to be improved because it's pictures. However, that's not always the case, and it's for this very reason that it's so highly concentrated. We still want to focus on things that are very important there when we're talking about what is the main idea, what is evidence to support this main idea, when we're looking at comparing and contrasting particular ideas. So just because it's something that's done visually doesn't mean that our students are not going to need support. In fact, in some ways, they're going to need even more support, or at least different kinds of support. So I really love this image. It is by Blackall, and it's considered a visual array. You can find it on Flickr. It's in a lot of textbooks about visual literacy and regular literacy as well. Many times there are chapters, but it's called Basic Visual Literacy Components. And so at the heart of it, we can see that visual literacy, and if we look at that exterior ring, it comes in many shapes and sizes. And there are many aspects to it. So we find images, we interpret and analyze images, we evaluate images, we use images effectively, create visual media, use images ethically and cite visuals, and then define image need. And so these are the different ways that our students can use visual literacies and the different competencies that they're going to need for it. Now, hold your breath, because the next slide, it expands this thought even more. And so take some time here, pause the screen, and really dive into each section of what this means, because each one of these little bubbles is a sub-skill that our students have to develop proficiency in order to be able to complete the main skill proficiently. So, and that takes time. That's why it's very important for us to explicitly teach our students how to build these competencies with visual literacy. So visual literacy refers to an individual's ability to understand and evaluate information presented through images, which we've talked about. So they're understanding, but then they're also evaluating. They're making some judgment calls. It means going beyond simply looking at the image, and it involves assessing the message that the image is trying to convey or the feelings that it's designed to evoke. Developing strong visual literacy involves teaching students to observe and analyze images. So we want them to really become very keen at noticing the fine details of images, but then we also want to combine that with some analytical skills where we're teaching them to break the image down into some of its component parts to understand how it's working as a whole. They should be trained, as this says to the right, to observe the image as a whole and note what they see in order to provide evidence for the message that they believe is being conveyed or the feelings that are being evoked through the image. Visual literacy also includes a student's ability to express themselves effectively through digital media. So this is where we want to give them opportunities. This is sometimes something that I don't believe our students are given enough opportunities to do. In our secondary classes, we spend a lot of time teaching them to write and that is a very, very important communication skill. We also spend a lot of time shaping their speaking, which is very important for communication. But I want you to consider, especially for these 21st century learners, how important it's going to be for them to learn how to express themselves through digital media using visual literacy. So think of different jobs there. It's going to be very important for them to put a slide deck together. It's going to be important for them to perhaps put some sort of flyer or poster for safety. They're going to have to learn to construct maybe flow charts or some sort of guidelines. And it's going to be very important for them to know how to construct meaning using visual literacy. That doesn't mean that all students are going to be artists. We know that. We're not trying to blur what an artist is, but we do want to make sure that they are proficient in the practical application of putting together some sort of visual presentation that accurately and effectively communicates information. So when we're talking about explicit visual literacy instruction, there are some general strategies that can be used pretty much in any domain. Students do require direct, explicit instruction in learning to read visual texts. There are, just as there are with traditional text, strategies for before reading, during reading, and after reading. We're going to go through each one of these, and as we do, you're going to see that there actually is a lot of overlap, between traditional print text and visual text. So before reading, establish a purpose. Give them some questions. Give them some sort of objectives of what they are reading for. Preview the information available before actually watching a video. So for example, many times, but when we give our students videos, there's going to be like, a little blurb about it or a little caption. Help them to learn to use those so that they can have an understanding of what the video is before they jump in. Read questions or writing prompts which require responses and keep them in mind while they're reading. So I always encourage this before watching a video, which is visual text, or before putting up a photograph or a map. Have those questions, first of all, review them, make sure the students understand the questions, what they're actually asking them to do, and then put them somewhere that they're going to be able to see them as they're watching the video or as they're looking at the photograph. Teach them to use titles and captions, anything, legends, keys, any sort of tools that are present within or around the images that would help them derive meaning. And then it's very important for them to note and evaluate the source. Where is this image coming from? Why is that important? Do they already have a particular underlying motive or bias that I need to be aware of when I am engaging with this visual? Then during the reading of the visual, watch the clip or read the graphic several times if possible. When we're teaching our students, we want to keep those video clips fairly small, depending on the age and what we're trying to teach. It's usually helpful to do more smaller clips than one long video, and give them discussion time in between each clip. When we're looking at a photograph or some sort of map, have them look at it several times with different questions in mind. Each time read with a different purpose, and that's what I was just mentioning with different questions, different prompts. This is a type of close reading, just like we use with traditional text. Help them to carefully make meaning of the labels, the subtitles, any footnotes that are present. And this is where we would want to specifically ask them questions about that, the captions or the title. Carefully make meaning of labels. Practice reading strategies. So when we're looking at it, the same strategies that we use with traditional text, predicting, connecting, inferring, visualizing, we want to give them an opportunity to do that with visual text as well. Then try to separate fact from fiction. This is very important when we're looking at artistic visual text, for example, or photographs that perhaps have been enhanced. Um, so that's very important as well. And then analyze the intended audience and the author's purpose. So again, just like we would for traditional text. Who's the target audience of this, particular work? What do you think that the author of this work, the photographer, the artist, the designer, the cartographer, whatever it is, what do we think they were trying to achieve with this particular work? And then after reading, consider the reliability and the credibility of the information. Again, this goes back to the source, and it may actually go with whatever unit you're teaching them. So for example, if they are looking at a poster, perhaps maybe it's going to, let's just for an example, World War II propaganda. Well, that would be very important for us to teach the time period and why that propaganda used exaggeration. So it might not have been the most credible source of information. And we want to go to what was the purpose? Why was it implemented? So let's make sure that we're looking at the reliability and credibility in relationship to what we're teaching, the units of study. We want to reflect on ideas of understanding as well as areas of confusion. So this is the perfect opportunity to engage in those meaningful class discussions. I mentioned a strategy early on, think, pair, share. I mentioned that because this is the perfect place to do that. Pair the students up, pose questions that would require them to discuss their understanding and require them to question one another. That would provide great formative assessment data for you to know what you needed to address whole class about areas that needed to be clarified. Look for trends or patterns. And so we want to teach our students to look for trends and patterns when we're talking about data, when we're talking about specific images. What do they notice? What is getting smaller? What is getting larger? What colors are used, etc. We want to assess the overall message of the piece. And just like we do with traditional text, what's the main idea? What's the main message here? We want to ask questions, again, for clarification. And we want to teach our students, as I mentioned earlier, to pose questions themselves. And then pose discussion and extension questions. So I already covered how to do that with, some strategic discussion methods. Let's go ahead and wrap this up so that you have plenty of time to do your learning activity. Visual literacy is an essential skill for today's students, and teachers must explicitly teach strategies to develop visual literacy competencies. Please go to Moodle for a learning activity which will extend your understanding of visual literacy and allow you to apply it to your content area. I've provided some additional videos that explain why it's an equity issue, how it can help support the critical thinking of our students, and actually gives you some strategies that you can use with specific content areas and their use of visual literacy to smoothly integrate visual literacy within your own content area. All of that is going to feed your learning activity for this week. See Moodle for more explanation, and please let me know if you have any questions.